the best. I'm blessed to know that lust is a test. I used to be the victim, now I'm just envisioning. I'm knowing this is.
I'm Suzi Landolfi, and welcome to Be Crazy Well. Now, why would a therapist say that? Because we all have mental health struggles, even therapists. The good news is we have so much more information about how we can be crazy well. On my podcast, we don't focus on what's wrong with us. We want to know what happened to us. We're going to explore how trauma affected us, both negatively and positively. That's right. I said positively. It's called post-traumatic growth, and it's a real thing. Be Crazy Well will share mental health wellness practices, the newest mental health research, and most importantly, how we all get to create the person we deserve to be and the life we deserve to live. So join the mental health evolution and be crazy well.
To see within is to know yourself.
Welcome to Be Crazy Well, and I couldn't think of a better person to join us for Being Crazy Well because he's one of the craziest well people I know. So there you are. You could be the poster child for, or poster adult, I should say, for Be Crazy Well, Mr. Kittle.
Well, or child. I've been thinking a lot about that, growing old, but without getting older in that kind of way. The power of embracing youth. But anyway, thank you very much. I take all of that as a compliment.
Well, what's also important that everybody should know is that you have your own podcast. So usually he's on the other side, meaning he's got the camera or he's sitting interviewing someone and his amazing daughter has the camera. So I thought that, we don't want him to be a hypocrite. Like, you should never ask people to do shit you're not doing, right? That's the definition of a hypocrite. So I thought, well, you know what? He's always putting that microphone in someone else's face, so we're going to put it in his. So that's where you are. You're in the hot seat now, Mr. Kittle.
Boy, I can feel it. Temperature's rising.
That's right. On your ass. You're going to have a hot ass after tonight. Okay, everybody, I'm going to let Bruce tell you who he is. And of course, you know that when we promote this, we'll put a whole picture of him and we'll put all of his stuff and what he's done, maybe even if he's ever been in jail or anything like that, we'll put that up. But I am so grateful to this man and for this man and all that he's brought to an organization that's near and dear to my heart called Merging Vets and Players, where we put, there it is, he's got the t-shirt on, the MVP t-shirt, because Bruce is actually a member of MVP, but he's actually more than a member. So I'm going to let him tell you his backstory and his present story, and then I'm going to share a little bit about why I invited him here, and then we're going to grill him. Then we're going to just ask him some questions. So,
okay.
So, Mr. Kittle, would you please explain to everybody a little bit about yourself?
Super short version. I've had a lot of transitions in life, so let's see. Grew up in Iowa, played football at the University of Iowa, coached football, college football for 4+ years, decided to go to law school, went to law school, did pretty good in that, did a federal clerkship, practiced at a law firm in Iowa, then went to a big firm in Wisconsin. And from there decided I probably needed an extra degree. So I enrolled at seminary at the Chicago Theological Seminary in Chicago, obviously. Did that, commuting from Madison while I taught at the University of Wisconsin Law School as an associate professor in a clinic program there. And we did legal services for inmates in the state prisons. So I spent about 8 years working maximum security prisons 3 or 4 times a week, meeting with inmates. Got involved with something called restorative justice, facilitated dialogues between crimes of severe violence and their offenders. So did that while I was there. Got out, kind of got into more mediation more broadly, moved back to Iowa. Anyway, that road continued, and then eventually got back, practiced a little bit of law and here and there when I needed to. I've done nothing but criminal defense work most of my career. Coached football at the University of Oklahoma. And then throughout all that, I coached both of my kids, all of their sports. And so I got a daughter, Emma, and a son, George. George is with the Niners. And that's kind of how our podcast got started. So anyway, George got drafted in 2017. I was still practicing law. And then kind of 3 or so years into it, we've kind of migrated around and now live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, bounce around to football games. And Emma and I were in our 3rd season of the Hidden Pros podcast. which is connecting people through storytelling to help heal and serve the world. And I'm also a certified life coach on top of that. Did that during COVID. And our little work there is helping people discover and express their most authentic self.
I'm exhausted just
Yeah.
listening to you. I'm like going to take a nap now. I'm so tired. What you do? Well, it's that old adage of the more you do, the more you can do. So that is actually true. And what I'm going to add to that, and we will talk about a lot. So this podcast, Be Crazy Well, is under an umbrella from a veteran service organization that does a bunch of podcasts called Coming Home Well. And I met you while you were offering to teach mindfulness and meditation to our members. So that would have been a combination of retired professional athletes, many of which are NFL players, and combat veterans.
Right.
And we've had several, if not many, people come in and want to offer some kind of training. What I love about working with professional athletes and combat veterans is that they know how to train. They love training. They get it. They understand that that's the only way that you start to change. And they don't dig in and say, oh, that's just the way we always did it. Yeah, but we just gave you a new weapon. So you might want to train and learn how to use that.
Right.
No, I'm good. I'll just use it the same way I use the other one. Well, it's not the same thing. But anyway, so what happened for me was seeing how well you related to the veterans. I knew you were going to do well with the athletes. You are an athlete, you're a coach, your son is playing in the NFL. I get that. My surprise was how well you related to these men and women that have gone downrange and been involved in combat. So I want to ask you, how did that happen for you? What is it for you that made it easy, or at least not that easy, but maybe wanting to connect with these men and women that have served?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So I guess part of it was the evolution of both George. We're pretty active on the kind of charity community front with him, and he does a lot of different things. One group that's always been super near and dear to his heart, though, and all our families, is military veterans. So George has a couple of uncles that served, one in particular that he was really close to, 32 years out of the Iowa National Guard and 3 deployments and all that kind of stuff. And so kind of follow them, and their kids were about the same age as George's, so he'd kind of grown up with that. So when he's always done, Cleats for Cause, he's done the different military veterans groups and that kind of stuff and done a lot of work with them. But so after year one, we'd worked with a bunch of different charities and had different people on podcasts. And then we kind of bumped into MVP and we kind of got connected. And so one thing, George, is, that was very interesting to him and he wanted to help support that. And so last year kind of partnered with MVP to host a veteran for each week of the show. And then, so it's kind of the 2-part thing. George is on with an athlete often, talk some football, do all that kind of stuff. And then we'd interview a veteran. And then we let the veteran pick the charity that they want to do that. So I guess we had some exposure to kind of, working with the veterans and hearing their stories. And, it was really, it's interesting, kind of one of those things, life puts different kind of things in your path. And they don't always feel necessarily comfortable. New things don't always. But, I grew up in a household. I didn't serve in the military, and I had a very, very active pro-justice, pro-abortion, women's rights, anti-war mom. That's what I grew up with. And I grew up with Walter Cronkite, reading the death toll of the men and women in Vietnam, every night on the nightly news when we ate dinner. And she was pretty committed to, she wasn't a war person at all. And we were heading to Canada, that was her plan. So if I graduated high school, and I think my graduating class was either the first or second to get out, and they just dropped the mandatory draft registration, you know what I mean? So it was just right at the end of the Vietnam War and that. And honestly, I've had a lot of issues and has challenged and resisted a lot of the ways in which our government has used our military. But I guess one of the gifts of MVP is that, I knew my brother-in-law really well, and some of the things that he had dealt with. But getting to know and really developing relationships with more of the veterans on a super personal basis and listening to what they go through both how the military has treated them, and it's a very interesting dynamic. Almost all of them, despite some of the hardships that they've endured in the military, both imposed on them by the military and or maybe enemies abroad and all that kind of stuff, but all of them still have a deep love for the most part and loyalty to their military branch, which is kind of a cool thing. But so the MVP really humanized, the veteran experience for me, and so it was kind of an ongoing growth and learning process for me as well. But I've been a mediator, listener, lawyer, and criminal defense work kind of exposes you to about everything. And my last 8 years of practice before getting out of criminal defense, probably 30 to 40% of my client base were all veterans.
Oh,
Who'd come,
oh, I want to hear about that.
yeah. So, because they'd come back. And so, with criminal defense stuff, so I'd have these vets and, weren't, they were working at it, but they were still struggling, PTSD or whatever else was going on, and they tend to self-medicate through either various drugs or alcohol, and then it would result in some kind of incident. So represented a lot of military veterans and had a very good friend. He was kind of the liaison for between criminal, at least in Iowa, they had one of these between criminal and the VA and medical and psych help and all that kind of stuff. So we could coordinate a lot of stuff through those guys. So worked really hard with some of the vets and got to hear a lot of their stories at that time. And so that really kind of thrust me in the midst of the struggle of the transition, taking the uniform off. I didn't think about it in that term, you know what I mean? Because that was really an MVP thing, but it really made a lot of sense. But just their struggles and their families and wives and moms and dads and everybody that was trying to help them. And it was because they just didn't know how to help themselves, you know what I mean? So that was really, so those last 7 or 8 years of private practice before I got out here a few years ago. So that was a big exposure to it. So this was kind of a natural transition, I think, into that. And honestly, a lot of the vets that are on the huddles, and I don't want to isolate them, but I mean, we're all kind of fucked up in our own way, and we're trying to be, I guess, more accepting of our fucked upness and be okay with it. And then just agree that I think a very wise woman, I think she said, we need to recognize our own shit. We need to own our own shit, and we need to then share our own shit. Something to that effect.
Some of that effect, I said.
Yeah.
I mean, she said.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's been kind of the journey, and it's really been a privilege and an honor. And you hear the stories and the sacrifices they've made and the pain that they endure, even to this day, after maybe 10 years out, they're still struggling with stuff. So have a deep kind of empathy and passion for being able to share their story. And then I think what also really brought me in, the longer we got into it, was the commonality of the way in which we stigmatize and reject people with mental health issues. And so that is one of the things. I've had some family members really struggle with mental health issues, and this was back kind of 70s, and it wasn't pretty. It was electroshock, it was shaming, a lot of drugs and Medicaid. And it was just a hush hush thing. Nobody ever talked about it. In fact, first time my family member came back to our household and rejoined us, nobody ever said a word about it.
Yeah, that's the worst part.
Yeah, nobody explained it, nobody said
Right.
a thing and all that kind of stuff. And so so this whole thing about it's okay not to be okay, I mean, we don't want to leave people not being okay, but we want it to be okay to acknowledge
Right.
I'm not okay. So the mental health piece for me really strikes a very personal chord, because people I've loved have really, really struggled with that, and they've been shamed by it and rejected, and really were in a lot of pain by it. So between that, and I really loved, Jay Glazer's take, he's Unbreakable, and he talks about living in the gray and that kind of stuff. And so I feel a real connection and passion for working with and trying to help people out. And I mean, my own sense, I don't know that I've never been diagnosed in that kind of way, but my personality is out there a bit. I can be very much an isolationist, and yet, can be socially interactive and all that kind of stuff. But I certainly have had my swings. I mean, one reason I identified with football and athletics is it was really the only place I ever felt like I had a tribe. It's like, because you can do shit in a football team and on a football field that you can't do anywhere else.
That's right.
And there are rules and boundaries, but like there's a much broader breadth for folks like me who tend to have very high peaks and some lows. So anyway, so that's a little bit about that story. So it's been great being with the veterans, and I can tell more of the story, but we've had an opportunity, especially this summer. We've really gone on road trips and met people and spent a lot of time with people talking to them. So it's been a great thing, a real healing journey, I hope, for them and for us as well.
One of the things that struck me when I started to work with veterans as well I was introduced to them in a very funny way. Um, a big black van came down my driveway to my ranch, and it looked like a child abduction van. That's all I could think of. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to have to go look in there and see if there's any kids. And a guy gets out, he's got one arm and a funny hat and an English accent. And he says, May, I want to do a drum circle, and somebody told me I should come to your ranch. And I said, oh, my dad was a drummer, so yeah, come on over. And so we look, we find a spot. He thanks me and he goes, oh, I'll be bringing some veterans. They'll be coming. Is that okay? And I said, sure. And he said, would you show them about the horses as well? And I said, absolutely. And he gets back in, we make a date, and he drives off. And my younger staff says to me, do you know who that was? And I went, I don't know, as long as he doesn't have any children in the back of the van, I don't give a shit who he is. Right? And they go, that's Rick Allen, the one-armed drummer of Def Leppard.
Oh, wow.
So that's how I got introduced, because he works with the Wounded Warrior Project. He now has his own nonprofit. And I'm telling you this because I'm going to give you his number so that you can get him on the podcast with his wife. It's called the Raven Drum Foundation. They do a tremendous amount of work with veterans. So I say all of this because there's another civilian. I'm a civilian. You're a civilian. And this idea that some of us want to work with, and I say learn from.
Learn from, no doubt.
So I work with and I learn from. And I couldn't help but think when I saw you do your work with them, and I saw you do the whole mindfulness and the meditation, and how many of them want to talk to you personally and want to be with you. And I thought, we're doing something else. One of the things that the men and women that I've spent a lot of time with is their fear and sadness of coming back into a civilian world. And that we won't understand them, and that's very true. We didn't do what they did. The stigma that all of a sudden, oh, first of all, I'm going to thank you for your service, but don't get too close because I don't know if you're going to go crazy on me. Right? So there's that. And many of them, when they were a civilian for the first 17 years, 35% of them came from horrific families that were struggling with child abuse. Okay, so they've got that as well. So I always say then they leave the military and they come back home to the scene of the crime, the crime they've never talked about.
Right.
And they wonder why, they don't feel safe, they don't feel comfortable coming in. And again, exactly what you said about people didn't talk about it then, they still don't. And they can't talk about what happened downrange either. So in many ways, Bruce, you and I are letting them know that we want to know. There's some civilians that really want to know. And we can never say I know how you feel. I can never say I know what it was like or anything like that. At the same time, I can at least help you be a hybrid civilian, I call it. Because you'll always be a veteran. And now you get to live again, hopefully in a better way in the civilian world. And I can help you with that. I can help you navigate the civilian world. And that's what I saw you do.
Yeah, well, that's what we're trying to do. So, yeah, connect and help them and do all those kind of things. So, yeah, there's a whole lot in what you were kind of saying. I mean, making that transition, and then, and the huddle's been really helpful too. I listen for the most part. I'll drop a thing here and there, but like for the most part, because listening to their experiences and how they perceive themselves and how they frame their life experiences, it's been very enlightening in that kind of way. So my therapeutic background is out of the internal family systems model with Rich Schwartz. So having parts, for me is kind of a description that really works. And like for me, the military motif is that pattern is like over and over. They have parts that they developed in the military, and then when they come back, those parts are still burdened and or exiled, and trying to unburden them or relieve them of whatever they're carrying to help the vet kind of transition back in a way to reassign those parts, because they never go away, to new roles that would be more adaptable to their current civilian life. So that's kind of the framework that I approach it, at least on my end. I don't throw that out unless somebody really wants to talk about it, because normally, right, schizophrenia or like multiple personalities is thought of as pathological, and we try to suppress those or get rid of them. And I don't buy into that at all. So what I mean. So as long as those parts are kind of staying in there, but those parts will jump in and try to defend us, and we end up doing dumbass shit because of it and all that stuff. So, but anyway, so yeah, that veteran transition, it's just such, I was going to say minefield. I'm not trying to use that as but anyway, but it is really just a plethora of challenges and obstacles and setbacks and a struggle. So I don't know, you know who's on our podcast this week for the Rams game?
Who?
Andy Ward.
No, one of my
Yeah,
all-time favorite
I
people.
know it. And we almost did a 2-hour show because we got going on her kind of healing journey, and she let it all out. So folks, if you haven't heard this one, I mean, that is one I would definitely, and her understanding and kind of the cycle of healing, and you step back, you move forward and all that kind of stuff, and the journey that she went through, I mean, she really has some golden nuggets in there. So it was really beautiful. But it's a great description of, and I heard you say this early on and I've never forgotten it, was, I mean, the military can jack you up, and the experiences in the military, but they really exacerbate and make worse the stuff that you were already carrying. And so if you had unresolved stuff in your backpack already, and then you throw all the military shit on top of it, now you got this giant, huge weight on your back that is so toxic and so mixed up and so complicated to try to deal with. And so it's like you got to unpack all the stuff from before, and then you get into the military, and it's all been interpreted through the lens of that person who was already wounded when they went into the military. So, and Andy made a point too last, I kind of know this, but like I haven't been in it. But she just said, remember, a lot of people volunteering, signing up, they don't have anything else.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And so this is kind of their last, they need 3 cots and a meal for real. And they, that's what they do. But they've been through horrific backgrounds, a lot of them. And then we all drive them in. And then, it's not like the Army or whoever sits around and talks about healing. They tell me about your childhood. Like, no, they ain't
No,
done.
don't tell me that.
Yeah. And you do your job and watch on your left and your right, take care of your brother and sister. And after that, it's like, and then you get out, and this better than I do, but I mean, most of the stories I hear, like, you get a couple-hour interview maybe and a bunch of pamphlets, and then you're kind of back out. And I'm not trying to, like, I've not been through that, but that's a common story that I've at least heard from some of the veterans we work with. So anyway, so a lot of work to do there, and just helping them normalize, that experience and not feel like they're so far out there, and for sure to make sure they don't feel like they're alone. I think all those things are really important, and MVP does all that stuff.
And you offer something different. So I understand the VA, and I understand how it's a monolithic, one size fits all. I get that they only want to know what happened to you in the military. They don't want to know, nor are they able to necessarily deal with everything that happened before the military, and they're not even asking about what's happening after military. Right. So you have just this window of, I'll treat just that.
Yeah.
Right. I'll treat that. So I love that what we're doing, and I feel that I'm honored to do this, is we get to offer them some treatments, some wellness practices. I always call them practices, not tools, because I don't know about you. I mean, I can handle some tools. I'm telling you, I got my own toolbox, but I haven't opened it in a friggin' month. So the idea of having a wellness practice, like a meditation practice, like a mindfulness practice, like a breathwork practice, that's daily. You offer them the opportunity to do something that they get to do it for themselves, that doesn't have a pill attached, and it works. And I want you to talk a little bit about why mindfulness is so important to you, and the meditation and the breathing, what it's done for you personally, and how you've seen it affect and help with combat veterans and professional athletes.
Okay. So I guess that journey starts. So my daughter, Emma, who also does the show with me, so she got into yoga, I don't know, it's been about 10 years now. And so I went to the first class that she taught, and honestly, it was a hot yoga class, and I was pretty hooked. I'd really never done, anything like that. And so really ever since then, I'm a daily, if I'm in where I've lived, if they have a hot yoga studio, I'm pretty regular with that. But anyway, then the yoga kind of backed us into, it leads you into breathing, because there's so much of that movement and the connection to the body and doing all that kind of stuff. And I just have to say for myself personally, I mean, I have totally lived my life through the physical expression of my body, from athletics, as early as I could imagine it. And then in college, and then since then working out, I cycle, swim, run a little bit and do yoga. So the body for me has been super, super important. And maybe I'll come back to that, but in the IFS therapy too, just the connection between the emotional and thought process and the way in which those get dumped into the body, which cause dis-ease and that anxiety and stress and how it manifests in the body kind of in somatic ways. So that's kind of another point. But anyway, and then I would just say, as we got into the breath work, then the breath work really, I kind of backed in then to the mindfulness kind of practice of it as I got more and more deeply into the meditation practice. So I'm probably on I don't know, I am not a long timer, but yoga for 10, got really into breath work 6, 7, and into the mindfulness stuff probably 5 years ago, 5 or 6, something like that, really working at it and trying to, develop that daily practice. So, I mean, I think for myself, just, because I grew up as a youngster, had a lot of anger issues. I was a short, heavy kid, got teased, rejected. I wasn't on anybody's team ever. I was always the last guy picked, all that kind of stuff, and then high school kind of grew about 8 inches and, shed a bunch of, so anyway, made it to a D1 program. And so it's kind of a, miraculous kind of 4 years for me. So that I know nobody ever saw that coming, but anyway, and kind of, figured you're all healed up and all that, but, you never really deal with some of the stuff that takes place. And so learning how to deal with my anger. And then we had 2 little kids. And so just seeing that. And so, now I'm in my 60s. And so when I tapped into this and just, this idea that my thoughts aren't my thoughts, they don't define me, they're thoughts, but that's not me. And my emotions, everybody has emotions. There's nothing wrong with emotions, but my emotions don't define me. And so the notion that I can capture those, notice them, not get sucked into them, and then make a choice about how I want to respond, with clarity about who I want to be as a person in these difficult moments. So that I just feel like it gives an individual so much power over their lives, and it forces us to, one, acknowledge who we are, learn more about ourselves, accept our own wounds, that kind of stuff. And so it just, that journey, and it's just like yoga, really, because the more you do yoga, the more you can obviously kind of bend and flex and do all that kind of stuff. But it's like, it's a never ending, peeling of the onion, I guess. I don't know what to say, because it's like, as soon as you can do this new move, then there's like 10 more yoga moves that are more difficult, that never ends. And it's the same thing with mindfulness. It's like you get to a certain point and you're kind of, and I've always, particularly over the last 10 or 15 years of my life, this notion about living with a beginner's mind and staying curious and not taking things personal.
Not being a know-it-all.
Yeah, no, because
don't be a know-it-all.
Oh my gosh, man, I was on the huddle on Tuesday night on the LA, and it's just like these guys are just dropping dimes. You know what I mean? Like they were, we got into that, boundary setting and saying yeses and saying nos, and it was, the depth of that conversation was so prolific, and I was just like, dude, we need to record this. This was some classic stuff. But anyway, that's what I mean. So like I've been through a lot, I've studied a lot, done a lot of shit, but like, dude, real life, is real life. So anyway, so the mindfulness thing. And then as we layer that in with the veterans, one of the things I just have picked up, I mean, a lot of them feels like out of control. Like they don't, the military gave them control because somebody told them what to do. They had to show up at a certain place. They had a certain duty and all that stuff. And now they're in civilian life, and even their emotions in that, and they're free to kind of think and do whatever they want, which is all fine. But like, then how do they live out their life in action? And that's where I think a lot of them are really struggling and kind of flawed. And so that was one of the uniform responses I think we got when we did the mindfulness courses, were like, wow, just like mic drop, like, okay, just because I think a thought doesn't, like, it's just a thought passing through, like, and I distinguish between the brain and the mind, I mean? The mind is a separate entity that has thoughts. And we have the gray matter, which is our brain. And our mind that's what our mind does. It kicks out a bunch of shit, thoughts, some of them great, some of them shitty. And so it's like,
some that aren't even yours.
No, right. They
were given to you by someone else that brought you up or whatever. So that's not even your thought that's screwing you up.
There's no, seeing that, I don't know how far you want to go in that, but like, we call it underlying commitments, right? So you've accepted a rule, from that somebody handed down to you, like nobody in our family goes to college, or nobody from this neighborhood, or whatever it is. Yeah. And so all of that bullshit, and so we carry that stuff, and we don't even know that we're doing that. And so it's like, so when we do the life coaching stuff, those are huge, trying to identify, we call them gremlins or whatever you want to call them, but like these underlying kind of things that we still adhere to. Mom told me this or whatever. And you know what? Fuck that. That's bullshit.
And even the military gave you some of those thoughts that aren't yours, right?
Right.
They didn't. And I liken it to a rucksack. They taught me about a rucksack, right? So this is the question I always ask. So I'll say, okay, so you guys are going on a mission, right? And I'm going to take your rucksack, and I'm going to put a whole bunch of shit in it. Half of the rucksack's going to be filled with stuff that's not yours, doesn't work,
Can't use.
doesn't fit, you can't use, right?
Doesn't help you on the mission.
Doesn't help you on the mission, right? And all like that. And I'm going to give it to you. Now you only get
Right.
this much space now to put some shit in it that you want to. And I'm going to turn my back. What are you going to do the minute I turn my back? And every single one of them looks at each other and go, we're going to dump that shit out. We're going to bury it. We're never going to tell you as the CO, and we're going to put shit in that we need. I said, well, that's really what we're asking you to do, is to take a look what was infiltrated into you, the propaganda that you got, and question it. I say to everybody, just question every thought and feeling you have, because it may not be yours.
Right. And just, does it, I like
Does it work?
Is it helping me move toward my goals? Is it life affirming? Does it increase my energy levels and all that kind of stuff? And if it doesn't, I mean, that's what, in the life coaching thing, we backtrack from actions, and then we have emotions, and then we have thoughts, and then behind that is the belief systems, right? And then when you get to that belief systems, it's like, I mean, getting people to really write those down and think about, well, what was I told? Who am I? What do I really believe in? And then they come up with some stuff, and they're like, well, does that really work for you? Do you believe that? I mean, is that your rule? And like, I swear to God, like half of them are like, no, I don't believe that shit. I don't live with, but it still impacts their life, and they're still limiting their life in a certain way because of these old kind of rules. So yeah, cleaning out the rucksack, or for the most part, we do a lot of visualization around either filling up a pitcher and walking down to the river and dumping it in and let all that shit fly away, or like just taking a backpack and setting it down by the road and then hopping on a bus and flying away, or whatever it is. But I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do that. But anyway, that notion of, because I think mindfulness is so helpful in the self-discovery process. So we talk about kind of 4 steps: is know the self, heal the self, be the self, and share the self. And the knowing the self, I think so many of us have put off for so long. I think there's, you and I talked about that a little bit. What's his name? I'm going to say it wrong. Gabor Matre, or whatever his name is that, he's a doctor, but he just wrote a book.
Gabor Mate?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gabor Mate.
Yeah,
Dr. Gabor Mate.
So whatever it is, it's like I can't remember the name of the book, but it's like, there's a cultural war on the self, like, being your true self, and we don't accept it. We don't allow it. And you got to fit in, and you got to do all these other kind of things. And so our culture is sending us all these rules, and there's so much pressure now, particularly with social media and blah, 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 and what it means to be successful and all that. And you and I have talked about this, and I've dropped it on the huddle a couple of times. I mean, I thought I was supposed to be John Wayne growing up.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You punch people first. You just take women. You never hurt, and you never complain, and you never share anything about anything.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I thought masculinity was all about. And it took me really into my 40s to go, wow, John, I mean, I love the movies, but fuck you.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, dude, there's nothing about that existence that was healing. It doesn't help me learn about myself. It buries your emotions. Like, I mean, there's no way to heal, and Andy talked about this, for healing, it was all about going back to developing trusting herself,
right,
and then learning how to trust other people. And as she did that, in order to do that, she had to address all those things that were handed to her that she had no control over, the ways in which she was hurt young. And I think that's so true for all of us. I mean, we don't have the same exact trauma, but we get stuck, in some of that kind of shit.
we do.
And, we don't work through, we don't face it. And so, you just have to go back to it and, and deal with it.
Yeah, you do. And you get to, it's really interesting, because one of the things I've said for a long time, and then thank God a book was just written about it and I didn't have to do that. It's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you.
Right.
And then how it affected you. And now that brings you to the point of, okay, this is what happened. This is how it affected me. This is what I do now. Well, it begs the response of, oh, I can do different now. Now that I know, I get to choose what happens to me. I get to practice. Now, one of the things that you have done a lot is gone to football practice.
Right.
Right? You did more football practice than you ever did playing games. Is that true?
Oh, not even close.
Yeah, not even close.
I mean, college you play maybe 12, and then in NFL, so it's,
And veterans the same way. So every athlete practices more than they actually get on a court, a field, and a pool, right, to do that. Veterans and military men and women do the same thing. They train and retrain and train and retrain and retrain, and the amount of time they actually are on the battlefield or any place else and now let's just say the time on the battlefield is very intense and also life-threatening. But the fact is what they learned was how to practice. And you just talked about yoga practice, a law practice, right? A mindfulness practice, a meditation practice. So there's something here in the idea of practices. So for me, there are mental health wellness practices.
Absolutely.
And they're daily for me. They're daily because what happened to me, the shit that happened to me, is always sort of around. You know what I mean? I've healed a lot. I'm down to the mild to moderate effects of it. And so what I love about working with veterans and professional athletes is they know the importance of practice. They know that they get to learn, they get to retrain, and that they are want to know people. I always say there's two kinds of people in the world. People want to know, and people who just don't want to know. Don't try to tell them anything. They already know everything. So this idea that you could actually be a person that wants to know, and the men and women from the military that I've had the honor to be around, they're Renaissance men and women. They know about music and art and cooking and sewing. I mean, they are so competent in so many ways. No wonder they're aggravated with civilians. No wonder we irritate the shit out of them. Right? We really do. That's right, because they want to know and get it done and all of that. So what happens, though, that can make them go into an irritation. They want to get shit done. They want to keep doing it. What you've been offering them is this opportunity to go, hold on. What if you took a deep breath first? And because no one's shooting at you right now. And what if you took a deep breath? And what if you looked around you and you were mindful of the context of what you're thinking and feeling right now? And is it yours? And what if you got to think about what are some of the responses that might actually help you and be more effective? Now, I understand that you don't get to do that when someone's shooting at you. I get that.
Yeah, but
I did get it. Now you get to do that. You deserve to do that so that you can create the person you deserve to be and the life you deserve to live. That's what you offer. That's what I saw happen.
Yeah. And I if we can get them to practice, for sure, and I know it's kind of poo-pooey and soft and all that. think sometimes they think that, but it's, that journey in, to sit with yourself and to face some of those kind of things. It's a lot harder than chopping wood and doing, you know what I mean? To like rest. And you just, honestly, some of the clients, I always describe it as trying to get your car into neutral. You know what I mean? So the motor's still kind of idling, but you're not trying to go anywhere. And when you put it in neutral, it'll, and then it kind of calms down and just, and so that's what we're trying to get their body and mind into, just that neutral state. So we're not trying to get down the road. We've already been that way.
Okay.
And we just want to see like where the car is right now. So
it's
we just
so funny you say that, because I likened myself and my own practice from my anxiety. I could put the car in neutral. I get that, because I wasn't moving anywhere, but I had my foot on the gas.
Right. So if the motor's revved, right. See, that's part of
and I'm overheating the engine.
Right. See, that's it. So it's like in neutral, take the foot off the gas and just be okay.
Right.
Just sitting right there. And so, and that's a skill set. And you're right. And I think the beauty of it, and when I teach and describe it, we talk a lot about, if you don't practice anything, you can't do it when, I guess, bullets are flying, but like whatever metaphor you want to use, when life hits and it's stressful and difficult. I mean, and I still fail sometimes, things that really push some triggers for me. I mean, I still got some, and I know that. I'm much better than I ever have been at it, kind of realizing, okay, I mean, my little step process is, what am I feeling? And that's been an exploration, and I think generally, I don't want to stereotype, but I think women for the most part are much better at.
Well, we give them permission.
Yeah. So
you're
it's
trained to give them permission. You're not.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I got these sheets with all these different emotions identified. I'm like, fuck, I can't do that. I'm overwhelmed. I can't even do that. So I got like down to like 10, you know what I mean? Just
right. I can get you down to 3.
Yeah.
After this, I'm going to get you down to 3.
Yeah. Anyway, so what are you feeling? Why are you feeling that? So that kind of connection. And then the third one that's really opened up my process was, okay, what are you feeling about feeling that? You know what I mean? Because that's kind of that story behind the story. So like I might be angry, and then why am I angry? Because so and so did blah 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 blah. But then how are you feeling about feeling that? And you're like, man, I feel kind of ashamed. I don't feel like and then it's like, okay, why do you feel that way about feeling that way? And that's really been a real in-depth conversation for myself. But anyway, but I think getting people to like, what is it and where's that come from? And that's the process is like, well, okay, where's that coming from? And I always tell like, you have these buttons, and somebody may push your button, but you shouldn't be pissed at them. You should thank them for identifying for you areas that you need to work in. And it's our responsibility to take the spring out of the button.
Yeah.
So why did that piss you off? And there's no way through it except to go through it.
I told someone today that I'm in love with dimmer switches. Like the first time that I saw a dimmer switch, and I was like playing with it for like an hour going, holy shit, look at this. You can just make it a little bit, or it was like mind-boggling to me. And I thought, wow, if I could put my thoughts and feelings on a dimmer switch instead of an on and off, right? And I could just go, zzz, right, zzz, and then I could go up and go down a little. The other thing I always say is that every thought and feeling, even every effect of trauma, is like salsa. And I think it was like 36 when I first had my first Mexican food, because I grew up in New England. We didn't have Mexican food, right? So when Mexican restaurants had to open in New England, it was like a big deal. And I went, salsa. And then I realized you got mild, moderate, and severe. So I thought, oh, well, I have OCD. It's severe. But I can actually practice to get it to mild to moderate. And now that it's mild to moderate, first of all, I love that I can, clean quickly and organize things, but I don't have to do it so that other people are uncomfortable. But the greatest part of it is people invite me to parties because I'm going to help clean up. Right? I come to your house, I'm going to leave the room the same or better than I found it. Just because that's one of my superpowers and one of my gifts, not one of my effects anymore. It's not driving me. I got the dimmer switch.
Right. See, that's when you have an OCD part.
Yeah.
And that OCD part probably has been shamed and exiled for a while in certain situations. And now you've been able to retool that part, drop the burden, bring that part back into the fold. See, I envision all my parts, we sit in a circle because that's the restorative justice process. And then I use a talking piece with the parts and we pass it around. Everybody gets a chance to talk. But anyway, but that part, the OCD part now has been kind of, it's gotten a new role, and the other parts have welcomed her back in.
Yeah.
And she has gifts to share with everybody. And so she's, contributing in a very positive way. And that's really kind of the work is like, okay, she's caused me some problems over the years and it's been difficult and I've irritated people, but there's a lot of strengths here. And that's like our military folks, they come back. I can't remember if you're on that call. Do you remember the guy? I can't remember which call it was on. But he was at like some Memorial Day service with his family, and they fired off a bunch of little cannons.
Oh,
and they didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And they didn't, and there were a bunch of vets there, and like, so my man, he's grabbing his two kids, got his wife under the one arm, and of course he's reaching for his sidearm because he hadn't been back very long. But he's going into full combat mode, because he thinks there's an active shooter, and they didn't tell anybody, and people are screaming and running and doing all that. And when he was describing, he felt so shameful, like in that context. And we're like, dude, your warrior part, you were doing exactly what everybody would want to do, have the skill set to protect and serve your family and, save them.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to shame that part. I mean, welcome. Yeah, you're in a different world right now, but sometimes I think there was just a shooting in Oakland. I read about that, this today. And I'm like, it ain't that different. You know what I mean? And so I don't know, trying to, just retool that part. Like there's still a role for the warrior. You just got to kind of figure out how they fit in and don't shame them and don't exile them. So anyway, in total agreement about all that kind of stuff. Yes. All right. But the mindfulness can help with that, right?
Oh, so my God, yes.
So if he's feeling, I really like Professor McGee, who taught that class with us, her stop thing, right? So stop, like literally stop when you feel yourself either extreme thought, emotion, or whatever. And then take a breath, that's the T. And then O is observation. That's in the military, right? The SA stuff, situational awareness and self-awareness. So what's going on internally? What am I feeling? And what's happening around me? And then proceed. The P is about proceeding with intention and in alignment with your values. And so if you can just pause long enough to kind of do that, and the breath work is so powerful in being able
It's first everything. I was talking to a woman today, and I said, "You're not going to want to hear this because you think I'm going to give you a pill, or because you're saying, well, how do I get better, and what do I do, and what has to?" And I go, "Well, you're not going to like to hear this because it's too simple,
right.
and it's breathing. It's literally flooding yourself with oxygen because the first thing we want to do is shut off the adrenaline. The drugs will mask it." So yeah,
Right.
it's the Valium, but it doesn't stop it. It just masks it. It goes to another part of your brain and goes, "Oh, just calm down."
It relieves you of the work of doing it yourself.
That's right.
And I don't want to come across like there's not a role for some kind of prescriptions and all that.
True. I agree.
I am a believer though that overall we are way over medicated as a culture. So that's but we can come back to that later. Okay. All right, go with the Valium.
No, yeah. Well, I was just saying I liked how you put it better. I like that you said doing it ourselves first. So you're right. I'm not against medication. That medication and chemotherapy kept my grandson alive,
Right.
with leukemia for twice, because I joke and say he came from a family of overachievers. So he had to do it twice. The point being is you can only live, 3 minutes without oxygen. That's it. Like if you're a swimmer, maybe you got 4 minutes, maybe you got 5. I probably got a minute and a half. That's it. And I'm thinking, well, that has to be the first prescription, that you have to flood your body with oxygen so that the internal part of you starts working better. The chemistry of you needs that oxygen, your heart, your lungs, everything, but even your stress response system, all the stress hormones, they need that oxygen to get to a baseline where you can do what you're talking about, which is to be mindful, to stop, right? And then, take a breath. There you go, right? And then you get to operate, then you get to observe, and then proceed forward. And if you don't do that, you're going to become the Hulk. So I always ask them, what do you want to be, the Hulk or do you want to be Bruce Lee? The Hulk is a person who takes all their emotions and their thoughts and stuffs it down. He's afraid of them. He doesn't want to let them out, doesn't want to talk about them, and he keeps stuffing them in, this very nerdy, wonderful professor, until he can't hold it anymore, and then he explodes into this being, and he actually causes a lot of collateral damage, right? He thinks he's a protector, but sometimes he's a perpetrator as well.
Tearing shit up.
That's tearing shit up. Bruce Lee, on the other hand, didn't get upset before the fight, during the fight, or after the fight. He knew about that mindfulness. He knew about the idea of SA, which is situational awareness. What threat is outside of me, but what threat is in here? What if I'm the threat? I better make sure I'm not becoming the threat that I'm looking for. So that SA stands for both. So your mindfulness and the breathing and the meditation, the ability to be able to have some say over who and what you want to be and how you want to be it, as opposed to that's just the way I am, or there's a reaction and then I have to react even bigger. The wild horses taught me, and I don't know if I'll be able to put up some pictures of you for the podcast, of you in the 60-foot round pen with a wild horse. I have video of him as well, watching Bruce with his mindfulness and his way of being. And actually the horses love that. They're all energetic. So they're reading you and your energy and all of that all the time. So I think that that's what we get to do. We get to practice. We get to understand. That we need and deserve to have those practices and that skill in order to be the person that can truly protect themselves and others. Trust me, if there's an active shooter and something's going on, the first person I'm standing next to is a veteran. I'm going, are you a veteran? I'm staying with you. Because I want there was a Dr. Hogue that said, what if the symptoms of PTSD are not a problem? The only thing that is the problem is that when you the symptoms of PTSD mirror the symptoms, not the symptoms, the wonderful skills that you need downrange. So hypervigilance, perfect downrange. You want that, not so much in the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then you have no tolerance for mistakes downrange because mistakes cause lives.
Yeah.
So, but that helping your kid put a Lego together, right, it's not going to help. So if you go down those symptoms of PTSD and you take them as skills downrange, the only thing that happened was you changed the environment.
Right.
Those symptoms aren't even bad. They're just not helpful and effective in the grocery store or in your living room.
Yeah.
A really interesting way to look at it so that even that isn't something wrong with you. It's something that you want to still have, just not in every place.
Yeah.
And your mindfulness can help, do that, can help people understand that.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the breath, that is the simplest, easiest. And we were talking about the connection between mind and body and how, we talk a lot about not letting the mind dump its bullshit onto the body, but it does. There's, because the body's just there to take it. But with breath work, and, remember this too, people are, whether they're biblical or not, but I mean, the Greek term for spirit and breath are the same. It's the same term. And so breath is nothing more than energy. And so when you can control your breath, you're controlling your energy, and you will have, it is the quickest and most powerful way to control both your body and your mind, with that breath work as you're kind of regulating things like you were talking about. And I think people sometimes feel so out of control, and if they can just get that space and do, gosh, 5 rounds of a box breath, or whatever it is, they can do anything they want. There's a bunch of different variations. But it will calm the heart down. Your pulse will drop, your mind will go down, because as your body takes the breath, controls the body, then all of a sudden your mind's going, okay, maybe we're not under attack, and then all of a sudden, and then when that stops triggering, it also reduces all the responses from your body. So there's this real chemical reaction that goes on when the breath work is done. So but you got to practice it, because you won't do it in a crisis unless you're trying to do it every day. So it is something you got to give some work to.
I can't thank you enough for doing this with me. I just so appreciative of what you do, and we were so grateful. I remember after the first time I saw you do your work, I looked over at Andy Ward. So speaking of Andy Ward, I get the honor of working with her at MVP. And I looked over and I went, we found him. He found us. He found us. Thank God. We've been looking for him for 5 years, and he's here now. What we're going to do is make sure people get in touch with you. I promise you I won't put your phone number up there. I think it's on a couple of walls, some old bathrooms and when you were in college, but that's another story.
Another story.
That's another story. We'll put up all of your contact information, and you are welcome to repost this podcast, to use whatever part of it.
Oh yeah, we'll throw it up.
Yeah, so that will be helpful. And thank you for not being a hypocrite. Thank you for understanding that if you're going to ask all of us to put that microphone in front of our face, that you will do the same thing. That's how I know you.
Yeah, well, I haven't told anybody no, you know what I mean? So it's not like I don't give very many requests. So I'm happy to chat. So
after this one, I think you will. And for all the VSOs and even athletic organizations that are looking for this kind of new training, this healing training, this practice, I constantly referring you and saying, no, get Bruce to go with his daughter and the rest of your team, because you had a wonderful team that did the mindfulness Zooms that were just great, and can't wait to start them up again. Bruce Kittle.
Okay.
You. Bless you.
Appreciate it, Suzi. Thank you. And it's been, I will say this, I want to just give one more plug for Andy, because like you talk about strength and courage. I mean, there's a lot in that world, but boy, that was really cool. And just, I do appreciate the role that you have within with MVP, and the deep love and abiding respect that our members have for you, and that you are, I just feel like there's such a deep level of trust and a sense of safety that like if the steam starts to go, I know there's one person I can always call. I think everybody in MVP feels that way. And I think that's such a gift, and so well structured on the part of the organization. But it wouldn't work if you weren't who you were. So You didn't say fuck today, so I'm not sure where that's going. 'cause
I
you
know, I didn't fucking say it. It's fucking ridiculous that I
Well,
did.
it's a medical term. So,
It is. I'm licensed to say that. I am
exactly
a
right.
clinician. I am a licensed therapist.
So anyway, so thank you very much for being part of our journey, and we look forward to some more. And I just kind of a little shout out. This will be the premiere release of this. So every year all the football guys, they can, if they want to, they can select a charity, and they call it Cleats for a Cause. And so they get publicity and they put it out and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so this year, George is with his 49ers for the Cleats for Cause is going to be MVP. So we're really proud to do that. And so he'll be designing his own shoe with MVP on it and doing all that. We'll do some releases on all those kind of things. So, but anyway, we're super excited to do that and looking forward to a long working relationship. So thank you.
Bless you. All right.
Okay, man.
Take
care.
I'll see you in the huddle.
All right. Go, horsies. Go. All right. See you later. Bye.